Talk Radio. Welcome to Blog Talk Radio. If you desire to speak to the host, please press 1 at any time, and the host will be notified that there is a caller in queue. Otherwise, please hold and you will be able to listen to the show.
Hello, everyone. This is presently doing Ascension Radio with Janet Lessin. We're waiting now to be queued in, so stand by, please. And it will be Janet Lessin and the Ascension Age Radio Show. Hello, 661. You're live and on the show with TJ.
It's TJ. It's Janet. TJ. You don't know what's going on with this thing. I think my show's up and running on autopilot without me. I don't know why it's not letting me onto my own thing. I'm going to try to get in there, but it will say it's already it's already launched. Oh well, this isn't working. I don't know what's going on. So,
okay,
hi, everybody.
Yeah, I called in on the 646-649-0893, so it let me into your show, so maybe we'll both be on. I'm not sure, but I'll leave them both on. And,
yeah, let's see if it's recording. It's very strange now. I can't even get into the show. Just press the button, so I don't know if you're... let me see if I can get into it again while we're talking here, but... hello, everybody.
Yeah, we're live and on the air on mine, for sure, and it may be recording on yours since I called in your number and punched 1, but the number you gave me, so we'll just have to wait and see. But if you can't get into yours, I'm not sure if it'll be recording or not. So
I'm going to try that as we're talking. So,
okay.
Go ahead and start talking to our listeners. Thank you for dealing with our learning curve here. We are trying to figure out how to do 2 shows at once. We did it before. Yeah, we did it before.
Yeah.
So I'm going to go see if it'll look nice to you.
I'll read the Ascension Center organization, just the intro like I did last time, give people a little idea of what we're about, and why don't you be trying to get into your show so it'll be duplicated there, so we'll get double simulcasting out of it. So I'll be speaking while you punch buttons. How's that? And then you come back on after you get
unmuted.
Okay, I think we're live on both shows here, so let's see if it's working.
And
okay. I see you in the queue. I just pressed the button and you're unmuted, so now we're both live on the air. And I'm going to Twit and Facebook and Blog Talk so people know we're on. Come join us out there in the radio world. Okay, go ahead and read the Ascension Center.
What about your music? Is the intro going to play or not?
Okay, let me play it right now. We'll see if this works. Okay, it's only 1 minute, so here we go.
Welcome to the Ascension Center, a virtual reality of expanded consciousness. At the Ascension Center, we feature ideas designed to facilitate ascension, moving from this dimension to higher levels of awareness of the continuum and all creation. Here together, we become conscious and aware of the illusion, the delusion that keeps us disconnected, unaware that we are all one. United, we excel, propel existence led by love, create a new, peaceful planet with less resistance to positive possibilities, the highest good, love, light for all beings. Together, we transcend, become the accelerated, ascended, enlightened, angelic beings we all know we are deep inside.
Did you hear that?
Yes, I did. Thank you. Now let me read our mission statement for the Ascension Center and a few of the little courses that we're going to have, hopefully in the future. We, the members of the Ascension Center, ascribe to the highest standards of excellence with regard to the uplifting of humankind by providing spiritual and educational awareness. Ascension Centers was founded for spiritual growth, education, and continued research for the communication of truth. Services are provided as private and group counseling, study groups, classes, seminars, written publications, audiovisual tapes, and other workshop materials, which is a synthesis of ancient wisdoms and new thought teachings and philosophies. Now, in the future, we've got the new paradigm, which does include ascended masters, avatars, Agashon teachers, extraterrestrials, spacecraft, UFO studies and interest groups, meditation, affirmation, chemicals, aromatherapy, tarot, Kabbalah, channeling, chakra colors, past life regression, ancient beliefs and sacred teaching, numerology, astrology, yoga, joy-tish, balancing mind, body, spirit, and the meaning of Ascension. And we've been discussing divine encounters and the Anunnaki, the ultimate human experience with interaction between mankind and spiritual beings in divine encounters as recorded in scriptures and ancient teachings, providing a powerful drama that spans heaven and earth, involving worship and devotion, eternity and mortality, love and sex, jealousy and murder. But how much of these are based on real happenings and how much is based on myth? So we're sharing Anunnaki and Zachariah Sitchin in the future at some of our get-togethers, at least with our ET seminars and our Divine Expo that Janet and I are providing for our Ascension Center education and all those that are interested in what we're creating together with the Ascension Center. So we'll go back to our talks, and Tom is not joining us tonight, so it'll be Janet and I discussing back as we did the first episode, and I've seen a lot of you tuning in on my board, and I'm sure Janet is as well, as we get used to sharing together and simulcasting. So back to you, Janet, where we want to leave off or go forward with where we left off last time at roughly, I forget what age we got up to, and I hadn't had a chance to check. I think it was about age 8. We were going on.
Yeah, I think we were getting up there. And so I'm not sure exactly where we left off. I didn't have time to go listen to our previous show to see what the very last thing we were talking about. But basically, just to let our listeners know, we were going through our unusual paranormal lives that TJ and I had independently in different parts of the world. We're not sisters. We were born to different parents. I was born in Pennsylvania and raised there. TJ will tell me about her, where she started out in life. But we went through, I think, to age
you left off
about
with your
8.
You were talking the last time about I believe what had happened. Well, I remember listening to it. We got up to where we were both discussing, I think, right about our, well, I don't know how to say it. So, well, you want me to start with, maybe I can start us with the, when I died in the 2nd grade and had placenta previa. I don't know if I had that on there or not. Do you remember me talking
I guess
about
it's not the end of the world if I repeat something. So let's go ahead and you can start with your near-death experience at 8 years of age, and we can probably share some of those near-death experiences that we both have had. So go ahead, you can start. That's a great place.
Okay, and it may be because I'm tuned into your show, but you sound really close to the phone. I'm not sure if you're going to pick up that or not. It sounded a little muffled on my end, just so you know.
Okay, I can back off. How does this sound? I'm backing the...
a little better. Yeah, it could be. Let me see if I can... Can you hear me now? Is that better? Can you hear me? No. Okay. All right. So I'll turn that back on. All right. I'm not sure if I should leave both of these channels on for I've got two calling.
Yeah.
Anyway, do you have me plugged in on yours, so I'll just leave both of them on. I thought maybe it'd sound better. Well, folks, we're going to go back to sharing because Janet and I did discuss how we sort of ran across each other's spiritual energy, or if you will, the soul energy over in Hawaii, and we worked up to just sharing who we are, and last week we shared with my husband, Thomas R. Morris. So now I'm going to go back and take you guys back when I was young, and then Janet will, and we'll volley back and forth. We're preparing for conferences in the future together, and you'll probably hear just a synopsis at these if we go into our past in the future. But I'm going to go back to where I had seen extraterrestrials as a child, and we had discussed them as a young child, where I had had my first encounter in the field. And then later on in the second grade, we don't know how I got hepatitis, but I saw extraterrestrials come down with a big burst of sunlight. But let me go back to the first time in the hospital room, where I was calling them angels. I had placenta previa. No, that was later on. Hepatitis. And I was. We don't know how we got it. I was the only one in the entire population. And so that was a mystery. And, of course, they called in the health group. I don't know what it was called then, but they were checking around to see if anyone else got it. And I was put in St. Francis Hospital in Monroe, Louisiana, where I was born, and I had they had to take all my blood out because this hepatitis was very bad illness. I'm sure most of you have heard of hepatitis A and B. This was the infectious hepatitis that one gets from another, and I guess they could type them A and B back then. And anyway, I got very sick, turned yellow, and couldn't eat, drink, anything, and I was just really, really sick to the point of death, in and out of consciousness. And they sent for a machine down to New Orleans, which we didn't have one back during that time. Now we use them constantly. My husband's on them. They take it and they filter your blood in dialysis. He goes 3 times a week. So now I'm familiar with them. I can envision and I've seen them up close, what they do. They, purify your blood. So they took my blood out during this time, 1957 or 8. I know I was in the second grade because they had to bring me my schoolwork, and I was so concerned after I obtained mental faculties to know that I wanted to complete school. And anyway, apparently when they took all the blood out of my body to clean it and all that, it made me even weaker, and I had an out-of-body experience, or if you will, I literally died and came back. But I remember seeing these, what I called angels at the time, in the top of the room, and I know there was more than one. I would say 2, a male and female probably, because of the way my mind, if you will, we're going to discuss memories and how the brain works during these sessions that we're discussing our lives. But I remembered them as angels, but they didn't have wings. And I had told my mother, and they had seen me talking and asked me who I was talking to, and I said, the angels. And my grandmother was there, my mother, and I think my father was at work. But this went on, and I had told Mother, and then when the Catholic, it was St. Francis Hospital. We weren't Catholic. I was a Protestant, and we went to the Baptist church there in town. But the Catholic ladies would come and go, and so they found out about it, me talking to angels, and it was a very big deal. So they had some of the gentlemen that came in that wore the robes. I guess they were like Catholic monks or priests or whatever they're called. I remember calling one a father, but I got to know them very well, and I remember them with the chains and the Catholic crosses on their the chains that were around their waist. But it was a big deal, and that was my first time of really going public, I guess one would say, if you have to have witnesses. And they made a very big deal out of it and recorded it, and it was a major concern, and it was going to go to the Pope over in Italy and all of these things because I was talking to these beings, and they were talking back. But they assured me I'd be okay and that I would live through this and would do great and wonderful things someday, and I always lived by that. But after we went through this time, my parents had me tell them they didn't want them to take me away or take me wherever I was going to go with for seeing these angels. It was a very big deal, and there was a lot of people coming and going after that out of the room because of the way the Catholics believed, and because I was voicing what was happening, and I was very in my right mind, apparently, because many adults believed me. So this started a whole new transition in my life, but my parents somehow were able to make sure that I got to go home, and it was a very long summer of not being able to walk and talk very well. And I laid out in a hammock, and I remember the sunlight and bright sunlight, and these beings would come to me, and I described them like Glinda the Good Witch of Wizard of Oz coming in these bubbles, because I would see these beings, but no one else could see them. And, of course, now I was never with my mother or had any witnesses at this point. But I was walking to Mother was inside with my brothers and sisters, and she would literally carry me to a hammock because I was too weak to walk. And this is an occurrence that stays in my brain of laying in this beautiful little red hammock. My grandmother bought me to put between two trees, and I was able to stay outside. The fresh air was supposed to help me. And I was walking in one day to go to the restroom, which I wasn't supposed to do because I was literally too weak. Can't explain it to you how you can be that weak and not die, and yet be that weak and not be able to walk. And I mustered up enough energy to talk. But when I was walking in, I remember I fell back and fainted. And again, these beings came to me and propped me, stood me back up. And I remembered then that they were the ones that were talking to me when I was a younger child that I did discuss, where they would come and educate me as a child in my room, and my mother couldn't see them then. But I physically remember being one on each side, standing me straight back up on my feet. So it's a unique energy, it's a unique memory, it's a unique feeling, and then being able to think in my mind, well, they come and go so quickly, don't they? And I've seen Wizard of Oz 2 or 3 times because it'd come on every year up to that age of about 8. And I've tried to figure, if I started when I was 5, 6, then I was 6, 7. So it must have been, I turned 7 December 26th. So this was in the spring. I'd had it like March and April. And so we weren't going to graduate till the end of May. And I had to finish school at home, but they went ahead and graduated me. So these beings picked me up and told me I would be fine again. I would gain strength and go on to do great things again. And I'm going to let Janet share something, because the next summer I actually go to Roswell and White Sands, New Mexico. So, Janet, is there anything right in there? Because this next year I'm only like 5, I was 7, 8. So then I'll be around 8, 9, I believe, 3rd to 4th grade. But do you have any memories around there you want to share?
Well, yes, I do. Well, first of all, that was fascinating. This is a piece that I hadn't heard before, that you had ongoing contact. Most people, when they have near-death experiences, they go on the other side, and it's kind of just for that moment, and then when they come back, it's over. But you had continual contact with your angels and guides, which is very interesting. So I had, some near-death experiences, too, and I think I may have shared that I had a very negative experience where I was early raped. I can't say it any other way, just what happened out of my body, but there I was with my guides, and they were helping me fix my body and go back into my body, and then I went back into being a little human girl. So that was much earlier, though. That was around the age of 4. So let's look at my notes. What was going on? Well, basically, during the years when I was around 8 years old, I would have encounters with this reptilian-type being, although I'm not 100% sure what species it was. But it was definitely a being that was not from this planet, or maybe another interdimensional. It wasn't from normal human walking, talking life. It was something either demonic or extraterrestrial or interdimensional, and I'm still trying to piece that together. But he was a hooded being, and he would come through this portal that was in the backyard. Well, there was an alleyway, and my neighbor's backyard faced the alleyway, and our 2 backyards faced each other with an alleyway in between. And it was much like the Stargate movies. It kind of, the whole horizon kind of, when he was coming through this portal, it just turned into liquid. It looked like he was coming through liquid, and then it would solidify, and then we would have this kind of a battle where he was trying to for lack of any way to describe it, sucked my soul out of my third eye and crown chakra. And I would sit there paralyzed, and my heart was beating a million miles a minute, and I was going, this isn't real, this can't be real. But then there was this experience of, something was happening, and I had to fight it. I want my soul sucked out of my head. And then this being would say, oh, I can't do it, that's who you are. So I guess on some soul level, I'm a, powerful being. And then I'd break free and I'd run into the house. Now, you might think that was very negative. And at the time, I definitely would have put it in the negative category. But I think I was just learning how to balance these energies that were in the world. And there are light and dark beings. And so this being came, and he wanted something I wanted, and I had, which was a soul. And so I'm researching this fellow Nigel Kramer, who says that there are beings that try to steal souls. So I don't know if that's true or not, but that was my experience. And then fast forward in time, one day I kind of get guidance, and it says things like, go watch Harry Potter. And I wasn't watching the movies at the time, but I said, okay, I'll go over a couple of Harry Potter. So I got the right one, brought it home, and put in the DVD player, and Harry Potter had a scene where he was by the lake, and these beings were trying to take his soul, and he passed out. So I thought, well, at least I did one better. I didn't pass out. I was able to fight them off. So anyway, that was kind of one I might stick in a negative category, but here I am now. All these things are the sum total of my beingness, and so I think it's positive in that there's something very powerful that I learned from that experience. No real harm was done. And that was my only encounter. That was one of my continual encounters, like you have with the beings that helped you in your car. And your mother you had that scene where you were telling me where your mother said, let your invisible friend come in the car. And you said, Mom, you're lying to me. Anyway, so you've had this ongoing interactions with some beings that were not visible to other people. And then one final word on this, and then when I was in when I was 38 years old, my sister and I had a conversation about this being that I saw in the backyard, and she said that she had seen him as well, and that her boyfriend had witnessed it as well. So I'll save that for another story, so back to you.
Okay. The next time that's, I guess, on this particular chronological path, we're trying to share not all the details that we could answer unless certain people are curious, and maybe we're in an ET contactee seminar or classroom working with, we could probably go into all the details, or maybe just a few more than we are on this show. But we've got roughly an hour and 5 minutes left on my show, Janet. I had mine set for 90 minutes. I don't know if you did yours or not. But I'll go on.
No, I only have 34 minutes left, and I probably am going to have to go, but we can do another show. We can do some more tomorrow even. It's up to you. I just have an appointment at 4 o'clock my time, so can't get out of it.
Okay.
However, what we can, some is better than none. So back to you, what was going on somewhere in your adolescent to early teen years? What's going on with you?
I've shared this before on other radio shows that I did before Janet and I started in 2012. It was the time when I went to Roswell as a child. It was the third to fourth, the next summer. Somehow these beings had instilled in me, and I don't have all the answers, folks. Just like I'm sure Zachariah Sitchin that's passed didn't have all the answers, but he wanted to have further proof for prophetic dreams, visions, UFO encounters, and other extraordinary phenomena. In his book, Divine Encounters, A Guide to Visions, Angels, and Other Emissaries. And as long as I've had this book, I still haven't finished it. So I don't know why, but I'm working on this, and I'm hoping these memories, if I get down the basics, will get me to go ahead and do my entire life story chronologically, which I haven't done. But the most interesting story that people find curious is I get into this area like Taken, which Steven Spielberg did a movie called Taken, and the little girl's name was Allie Clark. Towards the end of the show, or in the middle of the mini shows for Taken, made by Steven Spielberg, a movie made for television, and a book called Taken. But it really made me feel like I had some kind of special abilities, because at this time I realized I really wanted to go to White Sands and go to this, physically meet these beings that were extraterrestrial. And my uncle Rufus and Aunt Vella and my grandmother were always instrumental in my life back then. Mother had several children, which we've already talked about, and she'd call my grandmother Aunt Vella and Uncle Rufus to come and get me, and which they did. And I had asked them if we could go to Mexico, or either Uncle Rufus decided to go visit relatives. Now, I don't know how the story got planted in my mind, but I wanted to go to White Sands, New Mexico, and I had an uncle out there, lo and behold, that actually worked in White Sands and at the missile range. Well, it's actually called White Sands Missile Range, and we went out there with the story that we were going to Carlsbad Caverns. And I remember going on the Indian reservations to visit some of our relatives. My Uncle Rufus was a full-blood Indian, and I don't know where he got the name Rufus Henry, but that was his name. And one of the uncles, like I said, worked at White Sands Missile Range. And we went out there, 3rd to 4th grade. I remember the time frame was exactly when they were having the Boy Scouts meet at the International Jamboree out there, because I was young. I was in shorts as we traveled out there, and I remember I got a crush on one of the boys. They were having all the boys come in off a bus, or just one busload of them, staying at the hotel where we were on our way out there. So that's how I remember when it was. I'll have to go back and find out. Probably 1960 to 61, somewhere in there, when this Boy Scout Jamboree was. But 58, 59, and then 59, 60, somewhere in there that summer. But anyway, what happened was we went out there, and we went out to the White Sands. We'd gone to Carlsbad Caverns, and we'd gone out to the White Sands, the big white sand dunes, if you've ever been out there. And in the white sand dunes, there was me and a girl that was my cousin, 12 or 13 years old, and her brother that was roughly my age, 8, 9, or 10. And I've got pictures I drew, and I sent them to Sally Hester out in Roswell, New Mexico, because she wanted them. She was working at the Roswell UFO Center later on in years, and we'll get into that like Janet did, when we crossed time over into our later years as adults in our 50s. But what happened was we were up on the sand dune, and the adults were down at a cement table talking, and it was after lunch, and we got to go up and play. And sometime between that time of 12 and 1 o'clock, when the sun's high noon, until we're playing all day, rolling and going up and climbing the sand dunes, you can imagine that, there's a lot of fun. And it got to be towards the afternoon, and we went up on the top of a sand dune, and then I remember a UFO, what we'd call back then a flying saucer, a silver disc fly over. Now, we had gotten really far away from the adults and the table, way down the mountains and the sand dunes, and gotten way over, kids playing over 2 or 3 hours. We got really far away from them. And they were concerned, I found out later, because they came looking and they couldn't find us at the end of the afternoon. But during the afternoon, as it came over, the 12 or 13-year-old cousin pointed out the ship, the spacecraft. And it came really low over the sand dune, and me and the little boy looked up, and we were guiding our hands from the sun, because it was going, it was afternoon, it was pretty, but I remember watching it go over, just like the memory is today, because you don't see that many, right, normally. So I remember it going over, and then as she said that, it's like we were all on the very top of the sand dune and looking down over several others, and it came down and landed down on the bottom of where the sand was. And I remember looking, and then he and she fell asleep, oddly enough. And I wanted to go down, and I couldn't wake them, so I went on down. And that's when I saw the spacecraft open up, and there was a gentleman there, and I could see other people in it, and he motioned for me to come on board. So I went and recognized them as relatives of mine, and I thought, oh, well, these are the guys that dropped me off earlier in my life and told me, we were family and been visited. We had visited, which I discussed prior, if you want to go back and listen to the archive, of being dropped off in a field or relating to a field, whether I was part of their family or I knew a biological family. So I discussed having a relationship with a family here on the planet and one above. So all this time as a child, I felt like I was, I guess later on when I talked to Ruth Montgomery and some other people that we won't mention yet, but I became an investigator later on, but anyway, they told me that maybe I was a walk-in, how something may have happened as a child, maybe I was a walk-in. That was a possibility. So I always thought of myself as a alien hybrid or a walk-in, but I'm not sure that's the proper way either, because now I feel like we're all extraterrestrials, we're all ETs. But spiritually, I've done the best I could to be a good person, but I remember going on board. I didn't stay a long time, but while I was there, I remember going over, and I've shared this on other radio shows, but I remember seeing, and this is where people started not believing me in a way that on this one, I didn't do radio shows for a long time. For years, I wouldn't go public. And then when I did, a lady in the Arkansas area had called in, and she was questioning because I mentioned Whitley Strieber. What it was is when I went on board, I remember a blonde-haired boy with a round face, 12 or 13 older, and I felt connected to him, and I always said, this one time, but in my mind, I always wondered if that was him. But she felt like I was just trying to play off of the energy, and so you don't ever want to drop somebody's name like I just did, because they think you're trying to make up a story, but that was whose face I connected it to. But anyway, I saw...
Well, you might want to ask him someday if he remembers this, because what's very interesting is that I saw two of my boyfriends on board ship, and then years later, I met them and we became lovers. It wasn't until I was going through their childhood pictures that I realized, I know that little boy. And I would see a picture and I go, that's exactly what that little boy would look like on the ship. And then remember the psychic that was in the 60s? I think she was a very famous psychic. It was part of the White House psychic. She said that in the 60s that the extraterrestrials were taking human children up on board the ship. And she pointed out that it's happening all the time.
There was Pat Roberts at one time. Of course, Ruth Montgomery did the Washington, too. She was a lot of people didn't know that, but several people have been people that worked with the radio and television and all of that back then. But anyway, I told them, we saw screens of the star systems, and they basically, it was like we were going to school like we were accustomed to, so I'm sure they made on the ship some type of classroom or made you feel like you were in a classroom. And I remember a tree, which is funny, but a tree that was in San Antonio. And I actually, as later on in life, go and try to look for that tree and look for Whitley Strieber, and he was going to meet me at a bookstore somewhere in San Antonio. And this was like later on when I'm in the U.S. Navy, and we can get into that later too, because the stories cross. But in my mind, they're all there, but chronologically it's hard to stick with the energy, because when you're doing this type of work, apparently it all blends like your past, present, future becomes one in your mind. It's very interesting how you have all these visual screens, a screen of the mind, and the memories are very photographic. But I do remember meeting people there or on the ship, I thought, or either they were holograms or memories that were implanted, and I don't know. I can't explain that yet. And I'm 62, and this was when I was 8, 9, or 10 because I was 3rd to 4th grade. I know that, and I know that I started young when I was 5 instead of 6 because my birthday was before the end of the year because I always presented having to go with older kids. You know, they're always older than me. 6 months to a year is a big deal. 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, 5th, 6th. You know, because you're always the youngest of the group. But anyway,
I went on. It was Gene Dixon. I looked it up. Gene Dixon was the one that made the announcement that children were going on UFOs back in the 50s and 60s.
Right? So you probably did too. So whether you have the memories of it or not, now, as far as I know, it was just like the movie Taken. You know, they looked like humans, and they could turn into these other beings, apparently. But, you know, I've got a picture of them like we call them the crystal, or that you can see, I don't know, but we can get into that later. But, you know, how we... So this was the
Sam's incident where you went on board the ship and the fellow called you on board, correct? You're talking about that incident.
I'm talking about when I went on now in 3rd to 4th grade in flight.
That was in White Sands. Right, okay.
Yeah.
So what happened? The boy that you thought might have been witnessed, and then what else happened?
Well, I remember leaving and going back up, and then the children woke up and didn't know I'd been gone, and then we watched it take off again. And they were allowed to see it come and go, but that was their only experience. And then we were all talking about it when we went down to try to tell the adults. And my grandmother came half running up more than my aunt and uncle. They were older and couldn't come up the sand dunes, but my grandmother came up again. I told her again I'd gone up on the spacecraft again like I'd done earlier at 3 or 4, or 4 or 5 when she found me in the field and took me back in to mother, but told me not to tell my mother. But this time again she says, well, don't talk about that and don't mention it. And then we didn't. And in the car, me and the teenage and son and daughter started mentioning it to their dad again, and we're in the back seat, and he got really upset, but told him, we can't be talking about that he'd lose his job because he worked with these spacecraft or knew about it. And so that always made me wonder, but I remember we were scolded again and told we never to talk about it again to anybody, period, and never. And it was we must have talked about it with the adults. But my aunt and uncle never seemed to know what we were talking about. I mean, they always, they weren't tuned in, but the 2 teenagers, my grandmother and the man in the front, my uncle that was driving the car, did. And I thought it was very interesting. But again, I always felt like I knew something and was a part of something much greater than just everyday human life. I always had that feeling of, why is it that there's these things going on, but yet we're not allowed to talk about it? It's always a secret, so we weren't allowed to talk about it at all. And I thought that was very interesting. But it keeps going on, throughout my life as I get older and have more. But do you have something here, again sometime, or should we? It's your turn to share.
Yeah, okay, I can. Well, there were some things that I didn't have a date specific. They were just generalities of things that happened throughout time. So I had an initial episode like yours. Mine was in 1958, and I was 4 years old. And once I was on the ship, I was into my eternal self, and I had this great awareness of everything that was going on. And once again, there was the welcoming, like I was a soul family. So that is a mystery. Are we walk-ins? I don't think we're walk-ins, but I do think that souls can incarnate into human form, and a part of their essence is in another dimension or another lifetime. We can have multiple lifetimes. So that's what the research is indicating, but we won't go there right this minute. We'll just hold that for another time. But I wanted to go some more of the incidences. I had a lot of very curious incidences. Let me go into my notes here. So at the foot of my bed, as I was a child growing up, there was this grandmother-type guardian angel, entity that would just be at the foot of my bed, and I would be kind of aware when I was sleeping that there were eyes on me, and I'd wake up and I'd bolt upright, and there was this lady looking at me. And so I had to adjust to that. I at one point just started to cover my eyes, and then I would, put the blanket over my head, and I'd lower the blanket, and I'd look again, and she would just be there for hours, and I just eventually learned to just ignore her and just go to sleep. Another thing that happened was when I was home from, I would come home from Sunday school, because the church was only a block away, and I like to watch the cartoons that were on Sunday. I think there was H.R. Puffin stuff and a bunch of cartoons that were really good, and they were on Sunday morning. And so I didn't like going to the church part. I just liked going to Sunday school, and Mother said, sure, we can go home. So I would go home, and I'd get comfortable in this big overstuffed chair and watching television. And I became aware when I was home alone that there were some eyes on the back of my head. Somebody staring at me, and I was home alone, right? And I turned around, and there was this disembodied head. It was a man who had a beard, and his head was just floating there. And at first I would go, oh my goodness, and I just, duck down the chair. Over time, because this was an ongoing episode or event, I would just, I'd get up out of the chair, and then so I started to chase him, and he would go around the corner and up the stairs and disappear into this stairwell. And every time I got better and better, and I'd curse at him, and I go, why are you bothering me? So, the house I was growing up in is an interdimensional portal, and so there are beings and entities. And what I've learned later from researching discarnate people that once were human in human incarnations is that sometimes they don't have the ability to manifest their full form. So because the manifestation process starts with the mind, they can sometimes get their head only. And so I used to invite my girlfriends to stay over to witness all these entities. There were a number of other entities, and the other critical thing during that time is at one point I had a babysitter, so I was pretty young. It was probably 4, 5, or 6 or something, and there was a male babysitter that my parents got, and he showed me one of those, that movie where the guy lost his hand. He was a piano player. It was a 50s movie. The hands crawled by themselves. And so this was kind of like a screen memory. I started having visitations by the graves, and I started mixing realities because it's like, what are these hands? But I realized in hindsight, having worked with a lot of experiencers, abductees, is that that's when the grays started coming into my life. And so I remember for years, well into my 30s, I would not, I would cover myself. Even in summer, I would cover my head because I was afraid of the abduction. But when I read Bud Hopkins and I put together the pieces that I had an episode where I got an implant behind my right ear. I had the implant in my nostril. When I was 16, I got a scoop mark out of my right tibia, and it hurt for 2 years. And so I had too many of the symptoms. And I went, oh, okay, so this has been going on all my life. And once you have that awareness, then the memories start coming. And if you get a competent therapist, a hypnotherapist that can take you into it, you can go into these episodes and unravel the mystery. So, but there are a lot of conscious things that are doorways, gateways into deeper memories. I think the lady that I discovered this later. First I saw this woman, who was like a guardian angel. Then somehow down the line, my mother showed me my grandmother's picture, and then it clicked. I go, oh, that's the lady, because she was dressed like in an old-fashioned way. It was not the current times. It was a different style. Okay, so I think when I would come into, my brother had this experience too. The piano in my bedroom, I was in the front room, which used to be my grandmother's bedroom, and the piano would play. And I remember coming inside the house in the middle of the summer, and the piano's playing way upstairs, and my mother loved to play the piano, so I thought my mother was up there. So I ran up, not thinking anything about it. It's broad daylight, and I go, Mom, and then as soon as I got to the door, it sounded like the keyboard was slammed down, and it just went, and I went in the room. There was absolutely no one there, nowhere to come and go. I had I was blocking the only way in and out. And then usually I shared with my brother about, did you ever hear a piano player? And he had a lot of experiences. And then, of course, there were things moving around the attic above my head at night. So I had a very interesting childhood. And I used to invite friends, and I'd say, hey, do you want to see something weird or hear something weird? And I'd invite them to stay over and ask them, ask your parents if you could stay over. And everybody saw and heard something. It was not just me. It was something going on in my incredible house, which was a portal to the other dimensions. Back to you.
Back to me?
Are you there, TJ? Yeah, I think that's pretty good. Yeah, that went through, that was kind of like all through my childhood, even into my teen years. And same thing with the backyard in the summertime. I'd say, would you like to see UFOs? And I'd say, okay, we're going to sleep out. So we'd get permission to sleep out in somebody's yard or in somebody's porches. And we basically wouldn't sleep at all the entire night. We would just be up, telling stories and watching the skies. And people would be with me. It was like we would see all these UFOs. And they'd see them more with me than when they were by themselves. So I don't know if there's some kind of energy that I have that was kind of like a calling them in or something. But it was just an interesting childhood, seeing all these interdimensionals, extraterrestrials, and ghosts and the craft. Okay, we have about 10 minutes left.
Okay, before we get in our teen years, which is where we're headed into our teen and junior high and high school, but I want to go back and mention that somewhere in 1957 when Sputnik came over, I remember standing out and watching it fly over. It was a really big deal. People were standing out in the street. And my dad, even before he passed a few years back, I went through, and he said, "You still remember that?" And I was like, "Oh, yeah." And he was very impressed that he remembered doing it, standing out and watching Sputnik fly over, and how I seem to know a lot about extraterrestrials and flyover, and that just is impressive. But it needs to be in there because I believe that was between my 3 and 4 and my second grade, having the incident I said about my out-of-body or my first out-of-body with angels. But anyway, back on the track line, just so I'll throw that in there before we got too far. This is only our second archive. But going forward, I remember my brother always believed in UFOs, both of them, but especially Charles Houston. There was myself, Brenda, Nat, Hugh, Wendy, and David were the twins. Mother had twins. And so I remember on croquet, my brother was really emphatically into it, and I got really offended because he was bringing his friends over. They were born in 59, but he was like young, and I was in high school, but 9th and 10th grade. But I was starting to resent because he would talk about it and show people pictures and all that, and I kept reminding him, you can't talk about that. I remember, people are going to think you're crazy. So I go through this period with my brother Hugh, Charles Houston Thurmond, but I still have sightings and all of this. But as a teenager, I started experiencing extrasensory perception, even though I don't know what it is. And I started realizing I could think things and make them happen. And it was very curious to me that I would use it on my boyfriend. So I started believing in how one could influence other humans in my sophomore and junior year. That's very impressive as to how we start to. I was very much into band and music and knew that music had a lot to do with it. And I've never proven all that I suspect. But I do realize that I was thinking and wanting things to happen and occurring, and it seemed like I could influence. Of course, I was a pretty young girl, and you know how teens are. but I was able to get the young boys to take me out, and then I remember all the time when I could talk, say things they were thinking. And I remember this to being very affluent in asking them to practice it with me, and it would sort of spook them. But there was Victor Banks and Stephen Lee Parrish, who I wound up marrying and having the 4 daughters with, but 2 questionable as to whether they were alien encounters or not. But my children don't like me to talk about that, so be careful about that, when we get into that.
We won't talk about the children of questionable alien encounters parentage at all.
Yeah,
yes, we won't talk about that.
My children, although they've been witnesses, and they've had, now 2 of them are okay and 2 of them aren't. So Angela's not too fond, but she remembers, and Laura, and that's the 2 oldest. But the 2 babies seem to have to this day experiences, and the 2 babies. Of course, they're in their 40s now. They're my babies, but I had them in my 16, and this during Vietnam, and the next, talking about the ESP is all part of my junior high, and then marrying my high school sweetheart. He was the senior, and I was a majorette, and we had these, extrasensory perception type of energy, and then at NASA, he's working at NASA, 69, 70. So we had Angela in 68, and, of course, most of you people know we walked on the moon, and he was working in NASA in the control room, and they were seeing UFOs, but back then we weren't allowed to talk about it, spacecraft, UFOs, bogies, 10 o'clock or 12 o'clock high or whatever, but he actually ran the typing pool, and he worked during the manned spacecraft missions, the Apollo missions, and when man walked on the moon. And, of course, they had seen UFOs, and they weren't, I remember him, I had a Jagex KE 150, chocolate brown, 2-seater. I just had Lauren. But anyway, when man was walking on the moon and all of that, we were actually talking about, he had me come down there, and he says, well, I know that you're into this, because we would talk to engineers, and we would talk about ESP and UFOs, and we would go over to some people's homes that believed in this stuff. Now, this was in the 1960s, folks, late 60s and the 70s. And with him working at NASA at Houston, it was then NASA, and I think it became Johnson Spacecraft Center later on, and then Kennedy in Florida. And Steve was from Florida, and his name got put in the NASA, or it's on the NASA walls to this day, Stephen Lee Parrish, and working on these missions. But he got started. His dad worked for Grumman. He's passed, Donald Lee Parrish, and then his father had worked for the TVA Authority, but that's just for the history buffs. But Steve actually worked, Chris Kraft, what happened was he had 5 scholarships in music. He had been all state. He was really brilliant, and that's how he got accepted at NASA. His dad worked for Grumman in NASA, and his dad somehow was able to get in touch because he was going to be drafted into the Vietnam War. And he was tall and skinny and a great musician, and we were talented with music, and we had done the 3 Jets, me, Victor, and he were the best 3 trumpet players. And anyway, we'd done a lot of symphonic type work, and he was in the all-state band and had the scholarships. So even though he was what's called 1A, I believe it went from 4E to 1A, and he was a 1A, meaning he had to go to Vietnam. All the guys, and most of our senior class in 67 came back in body bags. I remember it was a really severe thing, 67, 68. So he didn't want to go, and he went down. I remember him saying it was the most embarrassing experience of his life at MEPS, Houston, where they were stripped down butt naked, is what he called it, standing in line covering their private parts. But he still had to go through it, but he was able to get out of it. It was very instrumental in being able to work at NASA. In other words, he got out of it, but he was married, so we got married, had a child, and so he was married, had a child, went back to college, and was able to get on at NASA. So he didn't have to go to war. Otherwise, he would have probably been killed. So we have, I wanted to fight. It's so funny. I felt wired or programmed to want to defend our country, and of course I couldn't being a woman or young girl, but I also knew that we were going to have UFO encounters, and we did, all through me having children and having a lot of UFO encounters and a lot of sightings of my children and their children. And my whole life has just been full of UFO sightings and all of that. So, Janet, how much time do we have until you go?
Well, I only have 2 minutes and 35 seconds until I have to leave. And, that's fascinating. You know, the Vietnam War, I was in school in those years, and my class, I was a couple of years younger than you, so we were looking at that potential drafting, but by the time I graduated in 72, it was pretty much over. So most of my siblings, my classmates, did not have to go through that. But my boyfriend was the class of 69, so he was facing that draft. And that was terrifying for me as his girlfriend, and I was only 16 and or 15, and and it's like a little bit young getting married. I ended up getting married to him when I was 16, and his number was too high. So you guys out there, you're lucky. There was not a draft. You could be facing a draft, and now it's a volunteer army, which is much better. People want to go are volunteering to go, so it seems to work. Okay, any final words? We have about a minute and a half.
All right, well, we'll just stop off there in our teen years. If you can write it down a note, and I will too, and we'll just pick up I can go into, some of the sightings with my children and all the locations and stuff next time maybe. And
we'll do that next Wednesday, same time. And hopefully we'll figure out the bugs here. But I'm going to talk about the goal in the stairway, and going down to the tunnels under my house, astrally. So,
okay.
And you're going to come here. You have children by the time. Yeah, you're a couple years older, so. Okay.
Yeah, I go through having 4 daughters. And Yeah, we'll start, I guess, from there forward and try to remember some things that we should share and maybe not share. I don't know. But anyway, we'll get on and talk about the future with divine encounters, right, and where we're going with that.
Right. And I'm going to play a little piece of music right here, okay, just for an exit. So thank you, everybody. Thanks for coming. Aloha.
Well, thanks, Janet. We'll see you next Wednesday, if not before.
Okay,
good night. Okay, I'm going to cut this off now, and I'll cut that show off, and we will continue while we're cut off on her show so she can play her music and end her show. And we are going to cut it off here, folks, and enjoyed it, and we'll be back here doing readings Thursday night. That's tomorrow night, so hope you join us. Good night, folks. We'll see you then. I'm going to play a little music here. I'll play this transporter out, okay? And see you next Wednesday for the rest of this show. Good night.